It is said that the town of Zil was to be one of the most peaceful and safest places in Europe. Its scenery, its rich history, making Zil one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. Its crime rate is practically non-existing. That was until a couple days ago, when Zil had found itself in the shadow of an unexpected horror. 5 people found brutally murdered in the peaceful town of Zil. A family of 3, a local farmer, and the town's police chief, all slain by a maniac who was last seen fleeing into the woods after attacking the local priest at his church. Even though the authorities claim that the murderer was shot several times, and they're now looking for his body, Ron Milton was not satisfied with the outcome of the event. Ron Milton, a man of immense wealth and success to his name, was now pursuing these dreams of settling his roots in this town. A man who expects nothing less than results when it comes to his goals, which explains why he was not satisfied with the results of moving into this town and seeing this town for what it truly is. Just a boring town that thrives from tourists, its history neglected, and its authority being a sad joke. Ron truly had no care for Zil. Any king can say that this town was not worth conquering. Being one of the most successful businessmen in Europe, Ron is very well known for running an empire with an iron fist in the business industry, a dominating personality, and a determination to see results. And there is nothing more that Ron despises than not seeing the kind of results that abide by his reasonable expectations. The feelings of disappointment. Since he, his wife Maggie, their 2 children, Debbie and Ian, decided to move their family name to Zil, Ron had nothing but disappointment after the other when he began preparing his move into this miserable little town, beginning with the construction of his castle being behind schedule and having to reside within a local hotel much longer than he expected. Ron Milton is a king who conquered many kingdoms, and yet, even if everything met his expectations in Zil, Ron knew that there will be no happiness from the spoils of his success. Just a man acting out of nature instead of pursuing dreams. For this troubled him, and when Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer. This town, its scenery, its neglected history, is not the dreams of Ron Milton, for he had lost his ability to chase his own dreams. Zil was the dreams of his wife, Maggie. Unfortunately, the dream had found itself facing a dilemma. This unexpected horror had just tarnished the reputation of this small town, or perhaps someone had exposed Zil for what it truly is. Even though authorities claimed that the threat was resolved, a psycho killer was still on the loose, and his wife Maggie losing the feelings of security, causing Ron to experience another disappointment when not seeing the results he expected. A father, a wife, a local farmer, a child, a police chief, all murdered. Even the local reverend who suffered severe injuries. And here they say the situation was handled without providing a body. And with Maggie talking about going back to London until all this is over, Ron knew what would happen if they went back to London, knowing that they will not be coming back. No, Ron was a man who was determined to pursue a dream, even if it's not his own, which is why he would rather drive Maggie and the kids back to London and stay in Zil, to see for himself that this killer is either brought to justice or his dead body is found. Rawhead will not acknowledge it. There is a fear within this devil. Yes, it hides, it flees from certain danger. But that should not define Rawhead's weakness. From the distance, it watched the red beast coming down the long stretch of road like a predator. This was a different world for Rawhead. Its humans were more pitiful and ignorant. The barbarians now lacked the rage for blood and violence. And the fear of death was more powerful than bringing death itself. Rawhead was afraid, because of the unknown of this time, that maybe this fear for the human might stems from their comforts of feeling protected by the same power that had driven him underground. Since his escape, Rawhead had faced strange creatures, weaponry, in ways that were different from the humans of his time. Since his first kill, Rawhead made great effort in refraining himself from indulging these urges for blood and flesh. Rawhead cannot afford another humiliating defeat by making the same careless mistake. The power was still here. Rawhead could feel its filth in the air, but what Rawhead was probing for is if these humans were aware of its existence. Had they discovered new ways in confronting Rawhead with that power, if he were to ever return? So far, from what he's seen, these mites, these barbarians, have forgotten their past. They show no care for their history. And Rawhead, seeing the metal box stopping in the middle of the road, are those children? A girl and a father walking into the fields, and a boy with its mother and the metal beast, possibly an ignorant family that are convinced of their safety from the recent horrors. For Rawhead was right about the barbarians believing in his death rather than pursuing him. For a moment, Rawhead thought that the little girl had seen him as he moved closer to the metal beast. But no, something else within the fields that had terrified the child, a dead animal, causing both the mother and father to tend to their distraught daughter, leaving the boy neglected. Rawhead could feel the woman's filth as he got closer. Not the blood cycle, but the first stages of carrying a child. For he must be careful. A filthy woman with a barbarian could be a risk, which is why Rawhead must be swift when grabbing the child. When the boy began seeing the darkness bathe over him, the child was stricken with fear when seeing the devil behind him, its beady eyes piercing right through him. The boy, too afraid to mutter out a scream, instead he tried making a poor effort and escaping, giving Rawhead the needed time to grab the boy by its ankles. The monster had no care for the father running towards him, fear within this barbarian, not for the monster, but fear for the child. The ignorance of these mites will become Rawhead's advantage in reclaiming his kingdom. Its children will be his to eat, and Rawhead tearing off the boy's head with its gaping maw, the sweet taste of child blood and flesh, the sounds of bones crunching in between his teeth, the delicious head juices going down his throat. Rawhead's attention suddenly focused on the barbarian's scream. A grieving barbarian. Rawhead knew of this behavior, where fear will evolve into a frenzied rage. Rawhead would indulge the violence against this barbarian, but not with the filthy woman at his side. Confronting this father could prove reckless, which is why Rawhead took the boy's remains and fled back into the fields. Yes, very soon, Rawhead will make its move and reclaim what is rightfully his. Ron Milton could not remember the last time he tasted tears. How he sat there in the police station pouring out his story to the officer, trying to adjust to the nightmare he had just witnessed. There was no disappointment for his pitiful appearance. Nothing against the expectations he had when composing himself in front of other men. Ron had no care for the absence of manliness with his self-image. Ron Milton was a grieving man, numb to the world around him. Rage was now filling his heart. Earlier today, a monster had taken his son. Right in front of him, it chewed off Ian's head, and it knew that Ron would suffer when seeing his child die. This is no mindless monster, but a sadistic devil straight from the depths of hell. And Ron sitting there, watching the officer nodding to his story, trying to ease the grieving father by telling him how there are officers scouring the fields and forests for this monster, drafted from police stations within 50 miles from Zil. They even hired the Ministry of Defense. Yes, they don't know what they're up against, nor what this thing is. As of now, they're doing everything they can to hunt this thing down. Ron's numb feelings transitioning into sheer disgust after hearing this from the officer. To think that before coming to the police station, There was anticipation that his story would be unbelievable, that even the thoughts of these officers would entertain the idea of Ron being the killer. Yesterday, they said it was a maniac who went around killing those people. They never said it was the devil. Ron could see that the officer was afraid. The man reeked with it, struggling to keep his composure as a figure of authority. They weren't looking for the monster. How many more bodies must turn up before these people grow a spine and do something about it? And when hearing the officer mention the attack against Reverend Coots in hopes of excusing his cowardice, that was when Ron was struck with an idea. Ron Milton never took himself as a religious man, but after today, he was willing to have an open mind, immediately rushing out of the police station. Time is of the essence. Ron Milton had to reach the hospital before it was too late. He needed to speak to this Reverend Coots, who could pass away at any moment from the injuries he suffered. Somehow, some way, Ron felt that Reverend Coots held the answers he needed. Despite being sedated, Reverend Coots was still awake in the hospital. Regardless of the pain, the immense suffering coursing through his ravaged pulp of a body, the coming death, Reverend Coots knew that the time he had left in this world was too precious to sleep through. He knew that before paradise, his fight against evil was not finished. Reverend Coots didn't know the name of the stranger who interrogated him, but Reverend Coots knew from the story they had questions in common in regards to the beast that did this to his body and taken this man's child. Time and again, Reverend Coots' mind racing through the images of Declan's baptism, the embrace of the beast, the altar, the hair-raising and the flesh. Maybe there was something that he could tell this grieving father. The beast, it fears something in the church. It fears the altar, not the cross, but the altar itself. And when Ron heard Coots mutter these broken words, the Reverend's body creaked as death washed over his face. Ron Milton watched a long while before ringing the nurse, then quietly making his escape. Ron could see that there was somebody in the church, which had been padlocked by the authorities, had been smashed. Earlier today, Ron Milton's son was killed by a devil. The only protection in his town is too afraid to do anything. Very soon, this town will burn to the ground, its people slain and children eaten. No more tears for the man who conquered everything. For the first time in his miserable life, Ron Milton was willing to work with God. Inside this church is the very thing that Ron Milton needs to conquer this evil. Tonight, on this night, Ron Milton is going to hunt down that devil and kill it with his bare hands. And may God help those who stand in his way. Hello there, students! Welcome to another educational video for the curious and sadistic, where teaching with Mickey can be fun. You're all going to die. Anyways, I hope we brought our nooses for today's class, because today's lesson is about hanging. So as I hop up on this chair, wobble wobble, and get this noose nice and snugly around my neck, let's talk about the vast history of hanging. You see, hanging was literally the first execution in America in 1630, as with it being the last public execution in 1937, an event that was held in Owensboro, Kentucky. Around 20,000 people who turned up for that event. VidCon, TanaCon. Surely Horror Show Con will definitely be the place worth hanging out. Now if you look here, I'll show you something. When a man gets strangled, the rope goes straight around the neck. It leaves a mark like this. But when you hang a man, the rope jerks the knot upward and the rope burn looks like this. It's not easy hanging someone properly. You've got to place the knot behind the left ear, just so. In a good hanging, the neck breaks and the spinal cord is crushed and the fellow dies instantly. Oh, but so much can go wrong. You've got to have at least 6 feet drop or the neck won't break. Or if the rope is too short, the neck won't break and it could take them 15 minutes to choke to death when that happens. Take the hanging of Blackjack Ketchum in 1901 for example. The rope was too long and she ripped alright, ripping Blackjack's head clean off. Now, even with a clean hanging, they'll thrash around for a few minutes, and God, the smell. Variety of spasms and release, you know, how they urinate and defecate everything all at once. I don't know why anyone would want to be hanged, but Karl Panzern did. After his conviction for murder in 1929, he wrote a letter to President Hoover, insisted that he had the constitutional right to be hung. And it was on September 5th, 1930, he exercised that right. Nowadays, only Washington and Montana use hanging for execution. And they even give you the option of lethal injection. Well, students, that concludes today's lesson in hanging. If you like, you're free to hang around and have a swinging good time with me. The Red Spot. While Ruth slept, a spider crawled across her face. It stopped for several minutes on her left cheek, then went on its way. "What is that red spot on my cheek?" she asked her mother the next morning. "It looks like a spider bite," her mother said. "It will go away. Just don't scratch it." Soon the red spot grew into a small red boil. "Look at it now," Ruth said. "It's getting bigger. It's getting sore." "That sometimes happens," her mother said. "It's coming to a head." In a few days, the boil was even larger. "Look at it now," Ruth said. "It hurts, and it's ugly." "We'll have a doctor look at it," her mother said. "Maybe it's infected." But the doctor could not see Ruth until the next day. That night, Ruth had taken a hot bath. As she soaked herself, the boil burst, and out poured a swarm of tiny spiders from the eggs their mother had laid in their cheek. On the way back to bed, he heard the floorboards creak. The mirror was already here when we moved in. The more I read of this town's past, the worse it gets. He got a job after the previous guard disappeared. Finally, she found the key to the old nursery. It was stupid to come out over the flooded town. There's never any fish. The waters are just bad luck.
All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. This